I'm Mick Garris. I'd like to thank you once again for joining us here on the Fantasy Film Festival. With us today we have a very special guest, one of the most familiar names in the fantasy genre, Roger Corman. Roger, thank you for joining us.
Mick, thank you.
The first thing I want to talk about, you now head your own company, you have for 10 years I guess, New World Pictures. New World is an interesting company in that it not only releases a lot of low-budget films, but also some more artistic films from Europe by Truffaut, Kurosawa, Bergman. Do you see that as a conflict or a difficulty?
Not in any way. As a matter of fact, it's proven very successful for us. The common denominator between these films is that they are somewhat, I wouldn't use the word anti-establishment, but they are away from the establishment. A low-budget film with some interesting advertising or exploitation angle is something that we feel we can handle better than a major studio. And the art films, the Bergman, Fellini, Truffaut, as you say, kind of film is also the kind of film that lends itself to the more personalized release that we have.
Now, with a situation like Paramount has recently released a very low-budget independent film, Friday the 13th, do you think your success with these films has maybe influenced the major studios in that way?
Yes. Why be modest? Yes, it has. I know it has. As a matter of fact, the people at Paramount have told me that. And it's very interesting. When you check to see what the business was on Friday the 13th, it was very, very good. And it was a very successful film for Paramount. As to how successful it will be for the producer, that's another point, because the distribution charges of Paramount and of the way in which they sell are very, very high.
I see. Now, you're probably best known to the public as maybe the king of B pictures. Are you comfortable with that title?
No. Because I started making films in the 1950s and B pictures faded in the 1940s, so therefore the concept of a B film was really out of date by almost 10 years before I started making pictures.
Well, how do you see yourself as a filmmaker and not a film distributor?
All right, as a filmmaker, I've been at various times writer, director, producer. I've dealt primarily in the low and medium budget field, although my current film, Battle Beyond the Stars, will cost $5 million, which by my standards is not a low-budget film.
No, not by any standards, actually. Now, one thing I want to talk about, too, your history in the genre particularly. You've always dabbled in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Are you a fan of that material? Is it just the most profitable to deal in, or what?
It's both. I have been a fan of fantasy and of science fiction, really almost all my life. When I was in school, I read the works of Poe, and I've done a number of films on Edgar Allan Poe. And also in school and in college, I was a great fan of science fiction, and I've continued to make science fiction films. At the same time, it is profitable, so I have the best of both worlds.
Let's talk a little about your history. Your first film was Monster from the Ocean Floor, which I believe was made for an incredibly low amount. Tell me a little how that came about.
All right, it was made for, I've forgotten the exact cash. It was something like $11,000 or $12,000. It was $18,000 when you included all the deferments. I had started as a writer, and I got, I think, $3,000 or $4,000 when I sold a script, and I used that as the basic money to make the film.
That's incredible. Now, what about Five Guns West?
All right, Five Guns West was the first picture I directed, and the main thing I remember about that is that it was a very nervous experience. I shot the picture in 10 days under very difficult circumstances, but it turned out well. It was a psychological Western with a certain amount of action. As I've gotten older, it seems that I put a little more action in my films.
Now, probably, thanks to television, your best known film may be Little Shop of Horrors. And that's an interesting story. That was shot very quickly, I assume.
Yes, it was shot in 2 days and a night.
Now, I've heard that story. Is that really true?
Yes, it is true. It was 2 full days of shooting in the studio plus 1 night of a little bit of exterior work.
Now, what did you do? Did somebody say, I'll bet you can't make a movie in 2 days?
It was almost that. My brother had been shooting at a studio, and I was having lunch there with the studio manager, and he happened to mention that the sets were going to be up and nobody was coming in. And I said, well, look, why don't you leave the sets up? I'll have a script written, and I'll come in, and I'll just, to see if I can do it, I want to see if I can make a picture very, very quickly, and I will pay you the rent for 2 days in the studio. And he said, really more as a joke, he says, nobody can do it, but I'll make the deal with you.
How much did that picture cost to make?
Well, actually, that cost a little more. It cost $30,000.
That's an unbelievable amount. Probably your best-known series of films, or you probably became best known because of the Poe films for AIP. How did those come about?
Well, I had been making very low-budget horror films and fantasy films for AIP, costing about $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a piece, each in black and white and on a 10-day schedule. And AIP would send out 2 of them as a double bill, was their method of distribution at the time, and they wanted me to make 2 more. And I was getting a little tired of this, so I said, rather than make 2 films for $100,000 each or a little less, why don't I take $200,000 and make a big film in color? And as I said, I'd always been a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, so I suggested The Fall of the House of Usher, and Jim Nicholson and Sam Arkoff, the heads of the company, agreed. So I made that for $200,000 in 15 days, the longest schedule I'd ever had.
I don't believe it. Okay, let's bring ourselves up to date now. This summer you're releasing Battle Beyond the Stars, which is your biggest budget yet, I assume.
That's right.
Let's take a look at one of the clips. We're going to look at 2, but first set up the first one for us.
All right, the first one is where Shad, played by Richard Thomas, comes to the space station of Dr. Hephaestus, played by Sam Jaffe. Dr. Hephaestus is a legendary scientist who has retreated from civilization in space to his own station, where he has been doing a great deal of experimenting for a number of years. And when Shad comes to see him, he is very surprised by the condition in which he finds Dr. Hephaestus. I'll say no more.
All right, let's take a look at that clip, Battle Beyond the Stars, courtesy of Roger Corman.
What do you do here?
You are welcome, Shad of the Akira.
Thank you, Doctor. This is quite a surprise.
I heard your story in the corridor. When you're in my station, you're in my presence.
Good. Then we won't waste time. Are you willing to help us, Doctor?
I am an old man, older even than Zed. I've seen wars, large and small, throughout the galaxies. Forms must prey on other forms to survive.
That's not what the Varda teach us. We prey on no one.
Your planet is doomed, and I have other plans for you.
Other plans?
This station was built for many. It remains a hollow and lonely place. You've met my daughter.
Yes? Wait a minute. You don't mean that you want me to breed with your daughter?
It's a very nice-looking film. Who did the art direction on it?
Jim Cameron was the art director, and Danielle Lacombe was the cameraman.
Beautiful looking. Well, set up the next scene for us. I guess he meets his daughter, right?
Right. The next scene is after Shad meets Nanilia, Dr. Hephaestus' daughter, and they're in Shad's spaceship getting ready for a major battle.
Okay, and who plays the daughter?
Darlene Flugel, a very pretty girl, a good young actress from New York.
Okay, another scene from Battle Beyond the Stars. So let's take a look.
What do you do here?
I don't understand.
For procreation, I mean.
Oh. Well, it's very simple, really. Males and females together.
Only 2 sexes? On Bilandic, it takes 3. And Kitzel, they
Oh,
have...
no, just 2. Just males and females, that's all.
That's a relief.
Well, maybe I could show you the ropes.
I've scanned information about mating. Does your species have kissing?
Oh, yes. We have that.
I think it's your torque bar.
My what?
Your torque bar, it slipped its groove. You're going to need a new one.
Yes. Yes, I think probably you're right. A new one. Oh.
Interesting looking film. Now tell me, Roger, you gave up directing officially in 1970, I guess. Von Richthofen and Brown was your last feature.
Yes.
But I've heard you've done some directing on this picture. Is that true?
Well, primarily the special effects. Jimmy Murakami was the director of the live action, and we've started our own special effects studio, and this has become my great toy.
I see. Your toy trains.
Right.
Well, that's interesting, because I have always wondered, do you intend to direct again?
I probably will. I keep thinking that I'm about to make my move back to direction, but the true problems of running a production and distribution company are so extensive that I never seem to get around to it. I would hope that within the next year or two, however, I could.
Well, that makes an interesting point. How did you make the change from movie maker to movie mogul with New World Picture?
Well, I had been producing and directing probably more than I wanted to. I don't know, I directed something like 60 films in a fairly brief amount of time, and I simply wanted to stop and rest for a while. So I started New World Pictures.
Some rest.
Right, as a producer, and felt I would get away from directing, and the thought would be that I would start directing again. I'd take maybe a year off. But what happened, as I said, the pressures of running the company became so great that I was never really able to make the transition back.
What about Roger Corman, the actor? You've had brief scenes in The Godfather, in Cannonball, and now you're doing one in The Howling.
Well, those are mostly jokes. I'm sometimes asked by friends of mine who are producing or directing a film just to come by and play a brief scene as a friendly gesture. So it's kind of fun for a day, but it's nothing more than that.
Well, speaking of the friends you've worked with, you've given a start to quite a few important people in Hollywood. Sylvester Stallone, Martin Scorsese, Francis Coppola, Jack Nicholson, Peter Bogdanovich, and others that first started working for you. Where do you meet them? How do you find these people and nurture them?
In a variety of ways. Having done a lot of films, I met people when I was first starting as a young producer-director. I met young actors, young writers, other producers and directors, and so forth. And then just being around Hollywood, I would meet people just socially at parties and so forth. Also, I studied acting for a little while with Jeff Corey in order to improve my work as a director, and I met a number of actors through Jeff's class and through knowing some actors and then meeting other actors.
Okay, most of the major studios in Hollywood are fairly anonymous. You think of Universal or Paramount, and that's what you think of. New World Pictures, Roger Corman immediately comes to mind. Are you New World Pictures?
Partially yes and partially no. How's that for an answer?
Good answer.
Partially because it is my company and I do run the company, but no, because I have a very strong staff, I think. Francis Kimbrough, our story editor, I consider to be the best story editor in Hollywood. Barbara Boyle, our executive vice president, Frank Moreno, our sales manager. We have a number of very, very good people at New World.
What do you think audiences want to see in a movie?
There's no fast, easy answer, and I could probably sit here for 5 minutes thinking, but just fast, I would say they want to see something that is interesting, that affects them emotionally. There's a statement, it's entertainment, but entertainment can be misread. Entertainment just isn't musicals and laughs. A Bergman or Fellini film is entertainment as well, but it's entertainment on a different level.
That's interesting, and that's what New World Pictures is all about, right?
Right, entertainment on all levels.
Right. Now, you told me in an earlier interview that New World Pictures could have been New World Films or whatever, but the possibility of moving into video and other projects made you select the name New World Pictures.
Right. I was filling out the name of the company for the Corporation Commissioner to get our papers of incorporation, and I was just writing down New World Films, and it occurred to me, how do I know that I will still be working with film? I might very well be working with tape or with some new invention. I felt film might be of the moment, but pictures are lasting, so I changed the name to New World Pictures.
And one of those New World Pictures we're going to take a look at right now, a Czechoslovakian animated film, Fantastic Planet, through the courtesy of Roger Corman's New World Pictures. Roger Corman, thank you for being with us on the Fantasy Film Festival.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,